friends, it's Jamie from Play to Learn Preschool. Welcome to our Facebook Live videos this afternoon. I had a few people email over the weekend to say, did we miss your video last week? Or are you guys not going live anymore? We definitely are. We were on live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday last week. And then Jem actually wasn't at school Thursday and Friday, and things were just a little bit hectic in our personal lives, and so we didn't do one Thursday or Friday. Sorry. Hey, Gemma. And then today is Tuesday, but we didn't have school yesterday, so that's why we're back on. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I thought today we would tackle a topic that comes up a lot in the Teacher's Lounge, but maybe we don't have as many opportunities to talk about it in this type of a forum. And that is how we deal with students who exhibit what I'm going to call like tricky behaviors. And so before I start with my tips and tricks, I want to say a couple of things. First, if you're a parent, because I always have a lot of parents of my own students watching, I'm not talking about your kid. I promise this is just in general from teaching for 20 years strategies. So I'm not talking about strategies specifically about your kid or that your kid is the tricky kid, I promise. But every year, at school, at home, as a mom, there's some kind of tricky behaviors. And so I want to kind of talk about strategies for that. And then the second thing before we get started with some of these strategies, I want to say that when we're talking about these, I'm not talking about the behaviors like the whole class is wild and crazy or they're running through the classroom, because those types of things, like where everybody's doing it, that's usually a signal that something needs to change from the teacher or the environment. Do you know what I mean? Like they were all crazy today, or this center was a mess. Then that usually means like we didn't set it up very well, or we're not, you know what I mean? We don't have the environment or whatever set up to get the desired results. But what I'm talking about is when everything else is kind of going okay in the classroom, you feel like they're in a good routine, the centers are running well, the class is kind of settled in, and then there might just be a behavior or a child who's exhibiting this kind of what I would say like tricky behavior. Be something that's disruptive, something that's just not on task, or those kinds of behaviors. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and then I thought we could just kind of go through what I think are the 5 steps that I use in my own mind when I have a student, and it could be a student, I'm not talking about a student today, I mean like a student anytime in 20 years, the steps that I kind of go through in my own mind to problem solve this situation. So in a preschool classroom, there's lots of different tricky behaviors. You have the kid who maybe cries every day, wants his mom. I would consider that kind of a tricky behavior, especially in January after we've been here, for a few months and everybody's kind of settled in. You might have a student who's snatching, every time they see something they want, they're grabbing it. I would consider that kind of a tricky behavior. The example that I'm going to use is a student who's completely infatuated with the light switches. So we're having our day, everybody's playing at their centers, I've got kids doing art, I've got kids playing at the pretend play, at the dramatic play, I've got kids, who are building in the block center, and then I have one student who's on, off with the light switch, right? So I'm going to call that, for my example here, tricky behavior. And so the thing that I always like to say to myself, I kind of have this like mental checklist whenever we've got a behavior that, in behavior modification we call it like to extinguish this behavior, which means that, we want this behavior to stop. Then the checklist that I kind of go through in my own brain after I've decided this isn't a classroom problem, it's not the entire class flipping the light switch, it's just this one kid, who's got a thing with the light switch, for an example. And so the checklist that I like to go through with my head is the first thing I always say is, how is my relationship with this child? Is this child feeling connected to me? And that is always the starting place with every behavior. If it's a biter, if it's a hitter, if it's a kid who's crying, if it's a kid who's running around the room, if it's a kid who's flipping on the light switches, or whatever the problem is, my first question is always to myself, how do I relate to this kid? How is my relationship with this child? Does this child feel connected to me? And do I feel a sense of connection to the child? And so that is always first, before I go through any other things in my mind about how we're going to solve this problem, this tricky behavior. I always think to myself, how can I connect with this student? So at some time during the day, when I'm having these problems, we'll say to the child, would you like to come sit on my lap and we can read a book? Or, I'll get down right on the floor with them. And not that I don't do this with everybody, but I'll make a concerted effort with this child that we're going to target this behavior and say, can you tell me about, what did you do this morning? Did you eat breakfast with your mom? Or, talk to me. Let's make this connection, even if it's just for a minute or 2 minutes. I might put my hand on their shoulder, rub their back gently. Some of my kids like to just hold hands when we're talking, and I really want to give them that eye contact and just connect with that child for just a few minutes before I try to extinguish the behavior. So, I get down, spend some time reading, or, the physical touch with preschool is really nice. Just put my hand on their shoulder, or pat their back, hold their hand, just touch their hand maybe. And I want to make the connection so that that child knows, I love you, I care about you, and, we're connected. This isn't just a free-for-all. And then the second thing I always say to myself is, will the problem be solved with simple eye contact? And sometimes, a lot of times, the answer is yes. And so if the child is exhibiting one of those tricky behaviors, I'll give a different example because the light switch doesn't always work for this example. Let's say I'm reading a story and they're just calling out. I'm usually holding my book up here and kind of reading and looking at the whole class, and the child is just calling out. Do you know what I'll just do? Eye contact. I'll keep reading and it's that eye contact. And a lot of times with tricky behaviors, that is enough for the child to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm not, I'm back here in the world. I see, we're connected, and that's often enough to kind of stop one of those behaviors. And then the third thing that I like to do, so let's say, we have these behaviors, and you can get to this place, Gemma and I definitely do, over the course of all these years working together, where we just are like, I can't even describe it, but this, child is so tricky or so difficult. And so what we like to do is when things are really, the kids I'm talking about. I love these kids, and they maybe have a lot more going on, than the other kids in terms of behavior and emotionally, language a lot of times. And so the third thing that I always like to say is, let's pick one behavior. So if the child is like the example I was giving, running around the room or not engaging in centers or doing whatever and flipping on the light switches, I'm going to pick one behavior to target. One. Because you can't say, everything has to change, because nothing will change. And so we're going to pick this one behavior. In this example that I'm giving, it's flipping the light switches on and off. And I want to start to notice, so this is step 4, the frequency of the behavior. For my own self, I need to know how often this is happening. Is it just that it's happening 3 times a day, but it drives me crazy, and so I'm feeling like it's all the time? Or is it every 10 minutes? The light switches are being flipped on and off 6 times an hour, right? Or 10 times an hour. How often is this behavior occurring? And so I just keep a little Post-it note in my pocket with just a little tally, just for myself, so that I can start to notice how often the behavior is happening. And then step 5 for me is a strategy that I call, maybe it's not what I call it. Maybe I read it somewhere, but it's just shadowing. And so it's hard if you're the only teacher in the classroom, but if there are 2 teachers, the last step that we'd like to take for these tricky behaviors is one teacher will shadow that child. And by shadow, I mean like white on rice. Like you and I are like this today, right? And I won't necessarily say that to them, but I'll just say, I'm going to shadow this child. So you go play in dramatic play, I go play in dramatic play with you. You go to the books, I go to the books. You go build in the blocks, I come with you to build in the blocks. And that way, as soon as that undesirable behavior occurs, the minute it occurs, I am right there. It is not a reaction. It's an opportunity. It's a teachable moment. It's an opportunity to teach. Oh, stop. I see that you'd like to switch off the lights, but it is not time to switch off the lights. Look, all the other boys and girls are still playing. We can't turn off the lights right now, but if you'd like, I'll show you on the clock when it's time to turn them off. And like, okay, and then I'll redirect and we'll play something else, and I see them go for the light switch and I am right there. Oh, I see you're trying to go for the lights again, but it's still not time. Come on, I'll show you at the clock. And it's like all day or until I feel like the child has the message, this teachable moment, oh, my instinct or my impulse is I want to do XYZ, grab, snatch, bite. You've got to shadow that hard with the biting, flip the light switch, whatever the behavior, the undesirable behavior is, until that child gets that memo that, oh, I feel the impulse to do it, but my teacher's right there talking me through it, and I give them that language. I'll say, I can see you'd like to snatch that out of her hands. But the better thing to do, what I'd like you to do is say, I'd really like to have a turn with that. Could you tell me when you're done, please? Right? And then I'll set a timer, I'll show them the clock. And so that shadowing behavior is the most effective way to extinguish any kind of an undesirable behavior in the classroom. That shadowing strategy, I should have said, or that shadowing technique. And it's exhausting. And so what Gemma and I like to do, and I wish she was here to kind of talk about it, but we tag team. And so if we have decided, we've gone through the checklist, our relationship is good, every day we're spending some time with this child, we feel like we have a good relationship, we're making eye contact, and that's not slowing it down. The teacher ratio in my class is 2 teachers to 9. It's harder if you have a lot more kids. We've identified specifically the behavior that we'd like to extinguish, specifically. We've noted its frequency for our own information so that we can say, well, yesterday, little Johnny flipped off the light switch 14 times, but today it was only 9. And if we're not keeping track of that frequency, 9 times is a lot of times to say, please stop switching the lights off, right? But if you look at it very statistically, well, yesterday he flipped the light switch off 9 times. And today was 14. Today's only 9. That's a reduction of 33%, right? We have reduced that frequency. That means tomorrow, maybe it will only be 6 times. And the day after that, maybe only 3. And so we want to keep track, for, at least for me, for my own sanity, so that I can say, this is working. Even though 3 times still seems like too much to me, I can look and say it's so much less than it was last week or the week before. And so we're keeping track the frequency, and then this day that we're going to try to extinguish it, or the couple of days, Gem and I tag team. And what that means for us is one of us is kind of with 8 kids, and the other of us is going to shadow this child who has this behavior, if it's snatching or hitting, biting. When I used to teach in a toddler classroom in college and high school, we would shadow our biters. So that sounds so awful, doesn't it? Biters. But in a two's classroom, you're going to have kids who bite, and it's really hard to react to biting, after it happens. The only way to extinguish those behaviors is to shadow the biter. And that means, like, listen, we're going to tag team. I'll be with them, for 15 minutes, and I need you to step in for 15 minutes, and then we sit for snack for a few minutes, and then, we get a break, and then I'll go with them for 15 minutes, and we shadow that child so that at the moment we see that behavior going to occur, we can stop it before it happens and use it as a teachable moment. I can see that you want XYZ. You want to sit in that chair, but so-and-so's already sitting there. Let's pull up another chair. Or why don't you say, can I have a seat in that chair when you're done? And so we really try to keep it very, keep ahead of it, and keep it very much a teachable moment. Because the truth is, and I'm going to even say that when I was teaching 2nd grade, that the majority of the learning, the content learning is important, the language, all those other things, but the most important thing that they're learning, especially in our preschool classrooms, is how to interact with each other socially and emotionally. And so this is not a strategy that I would use every day or in every class, even some classes when you don't need it. But if you do have one of those kids that is consistently doing something that's disrupting the environment and disrupting the other kids, is really just making the classroom not jive, it's just not working well, then those are the steps I go through. Like I said, it's not every day, for sure. It's not even every year. There's some years when we don't ever have to use, these strategies, but it's important if you've got, there are years when there's just some behavior, some child that's, struggling with the behavior, that we try to go through this checklist of how to extinguish it. There are some other questions. This is not an exhaustive checklist. Obviously, there's a lot of other things to look at if a child is exhibiting a lot of these behaviors. Do they need to be tested for hearing or language delays? Or, are there other global concerns about their development? And those for sure, things that you'll need to chat with the parent and say, I see these things happening in class, and I think it would be beneficial if you chat with your pediatrician about, some of these other things that we're seeing. And definitely those are other strategies. It's not really what I was talking about today, but absolutely, if you have other concerns that those are other things to consider. But the truth is that while those other concerns are being looked at, if it's language or speech or hearing or, a chat with a pediatrician, while those other things are happening, that child is still in your classroom, right? And so, yes, you can say, I told mom that she needs to go talk to the pediatrician, maybe try that child and see if they maybe need to be tested for something, which is great. But in the interim, that kid is still with you, right? Every day. And so these are the strategies that we try to go through here in our classroom to try to extinguish some of the, I don't want to say the worst, that's not the right way to say it, but some of the most disruptive behaviors. It is very difficult in a bigger class. I completely agree with you. But I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, how disruptive is that behavior? If it's like, it's just annoying, or you know what I mean, it's just a bump in the road, then I'd say you do not need to go through this strategy. But if you have a child whose behavior, whatever it is, if it's pushing, biting, snatching, if it's, sometimes you have these screamers. Have you ever had a screamer? A yeller, a kid who's screaming or yelling, crying. If you have one of those children and their behavior is so disruptive to the rest of the kids, then I think, as hard as it is for one teacher to deal with 19 while you deal with that child, what's the other option? We just continue to be frustrated about it, for the next 6 months? Or we just continue to complain about it? Or we tell the parent, we need you to take your child to talk to the pediatrician? And those are all great strategies. Well, the complaining isn't, but you know what I mean? All those other things are. But in the interim, you need to extinguish that behavior. And so I know it's hard with a bigger class. And I've actually had classes in the past that are really like a really active class. And it's as exhausting for the shadower, the teacher who's shadowing that child, as it is for the other one to keep up with, the other 18 or 19 kids. I get it. I've also done shadowing when I was teaching by myself with second grade, with like 24 kids. And I've got a kid who's, pushing or, hitting or whatever. And you have to kind of make sure that you're at this place where everybody else is functioning, like the class is kind of working. But then I would shadow a child even when I was by myself, if it's that severe of a behavior. And so that's really kind of what the checklist was about, not just like generally, my 3-year-olds are crazy. Yeah, because they all are. So that's not what this checklist is about. It's about when you have a specific concern about a specific child and a behavior that you are able, to extinguish. Somebody had mentioned like trying sticker charts, and that's a good way. If your child is old enough to kind of understand the frequency, and you can say, well, like last week, whatever, Miss Jamie counted that you switched off the light switches 14 times. And so today, every time, every 15 minutes or every half an hour, that I set my phone, to beep. If the phone is beeped and you didn't turn off the light switch, you get a smiley face, right? Or something. I mean, like if they're old enough, for sure, help them track the frequency of the behaviors. And I mean, we could talk about this for an hour, right? There's hundreds of other things you can do for difficult behaviors. But that's something that's definitely worked for us, is to kind of go through, do we have a good relationship? Do I make really good eye contact with that child when the behavior is occurring? Which definitely works for me. If somebody's acting out during circle time, I just give them the stare, keep reading, and I'm just right at them the whole time. And that usually works. Check the frequency, identify that one specific behavior that's causing so much disruption to your day, and then shadow that child and talk through them. Give them the opportunity to learn from those moments when they feel like they want to do it. It's not a perfect, they're kids and it's behavior, so nothing is perfect. But in my experience and with Gemma and I trying this over the last 12 years, we have been able to extinguish some of those most disruptive behaviors. So that's kind of the mental checklist that we use. I hope it's helpful. Jem and I are really excited. We were going to, Gemma's chiming in. The idea is to prevent the behavior, not react to it. Absolutely, especially when it's biting or something that, causes so much disruption to all of their families. Definitely prevent it, use it as a teachable moment, and then move on. And teach them, what it feels like right before it happens so they can learn to say to themselves, the child, oh, I felt myself wanting to bite, hit, flip off the lights, whatever the feeling is, whatever that impulse is, and this is how I can talk to myself. So we give them that language to talk themselves through it. So, all right. Tomorrow after school, Jem and I are going to share a really awesome process art project for you that you can use in the winter. You can use it for different seasons, I guess, but it's one of our favorites, and so we're going to demonstrate it. We were going to do it today, and then we had a little hiccup in our afternoon plans. So I'm excited to share a winter process art project with you tomorrow. Later this week, we will give you a tour of our polar animal centers. We're actually just doing penguins, South Pole animals this week, and our new dramatic play area, which is like a hot drink. We're calling it the Star Drinks, where they can get hot chocolate and tea and all of those kinds of things. So thank you for joining me this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful day playing and learning with your kids, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye, everybody.